This is a recording for Chapter 2, which is titled Scientific Thinking and Research in Psychology. I think this is actually a pretty difficult chapter. It can be difficult to understand the research process, so we're just going to go over it kind of in simple terms, and then if you have any questions, please feel free to ask me. I don't mind at all. So first of all, how do psychologists study behavior and mental processes? Remember we said from Chapter 1 that that's what psychologists study. They study behavior and thought and feelings. So how do they go about studying those things? The diagram is a diagram of the scientific method, which is how not only psychologists study things, but also biologists or doctors, anyone in the field. So first, observations are made. They may observe how someone behaves, and then they think of questions. What questions come up when you observe that person? And then you formulate a hypothesis, or you take a guess as to perhaps why that person's acting the way they are. And then you figure out how to test that. You make predictions, you make a guess, you develop ways to test that guess. So the way you do that is by gathering data to test your predictions, and then you develop a general theory. If your predictions were correct, you may go with one theory. If they were not correct, you may go with another theory. And then that method, as you can see, repeats itself over and over. You keep asking more questions and doing more research until you get more, perhaps refined or detailed answers. So research designs. There are different ways you can do research. The first example is a case study, which this research is focused on one person or a very small group of people. All you're doing is observing or surveying that one person or small group. A survey, on the other hand, focuses on a larger group and may use written surveys, interviews, etc. I'm sure you've all probably done a survey. I guess the Census Bureau does the most popular survey. Naturalistic observation, the goal of that research is to observe someone in their natural environment. In other words, you don't want to bring them into the lab to ask questions, but you want to observe them at home or at school or at work or anywhere else that they reside. Correlational studies look at the relationship between two variables. A variable is anything that, quote, varies between two individuals. For example, weight. Most individuals have different weight. There are different genders. There are different levels of depression. So anything that varies between two individuals is considered a variable. So how are these variables measured? How do we look at levels of depression or weight or blood pressure? Blood pressure and weight are pretty easy to measure, but things like depression or anxiety are a little bit tougher to measure. So this list is the tools and techniques used to assess thought or behavior. So self-reports, we simply ask the person, we interview the person about their behavior or their thoughts or feelings. Behavioral measures, we simply observe their behavior within a lab or, again, their natural setting. Physiological measures, those are pretty easy to get, blood pressure, heart rate, things like that, and we measure those under certain conditions. Multiple measures is simply when you use a combination of any of the above measures. You might be able to get more detailed information that way. So the experimental method. So the experiment is what we're doing in order to test our hypotheses, to test and see if what we guessed is correct. The experimental method includes an independent variable and a dependent variable. The independent variable is the factor that the psychologist is manipulating in order to see if it has an effect on the dependent variable. So remember, this is the variable, this is the thing that's being manipulated, it's being changed. The dependent variable is the factor that the psychologist wants to see if it's influenced by the independent variable. Does the manipulation of the independent variable change the dependent variable? And this Experimental method includes an experimental and a control group. The experimental group will essentially be the ones who will be manipulated or experimented with. They will be exposed to the independent variable. The control group will not be exposed to the independent variable. So I know those can be complicated concepts to understand, so let's look at an example from consumer psychology. Consumer psychology, just to give you a background, is the study of human behavior regarding their buying patterns, customs, and preferences in relation to consumer products, including their reactions and preferences to advertising, packaging, and marketing of those products. So essentially, it's just why do people buy what they buy, and is it affected by how it's advertised or marketed or packaged? So the experiment is a consumer psychologist is trying to come up with an effective marketing technique for a new weight loss product. His thought or his hypothesis is that showing before and after weight loss pictures will be an effective marketing technique. Again, his hypothesis is that customers who are shown before and after pictures will be more likely to purchase the product than those who are not shown the pictures. Can you go ahead and identify what the independent and dependent variables would be in this experiment? If you can't, it's okay because we're going to discuss that next. So the independent variable, remember what's being manipulated, is the before and after pictures. The experimental group is shown the pictures and the control group is not. The dependent variable is whether or not the product is purchased. Remember that the psychologist has guessed or hypothesized that the experimental group, the ones who are shown the pictures, will be more likely to purchase the product. If the psychologist's hypothesis ends up being correct, then he can conclude that showing before and after pictures is an effective marketing technique for the weight loss product. And that's just one example. There are many examples of using the experimental method. So if you'd like more examples or have questions about that one, please feel free to reach out. That's pretty much all I had for this lecture. Again, I know the experimental method and research methods can be kind of complicated, so don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions, and thank you so much.